Chapter 1. The Hero of My Childhood. I don't remember the exact moment I decided my brother Daniel was a hero. Maybe it was the way he always knew when I was sad, even before I knew it myself. Or maybe it was the time he punched a 7th grader twice his size because that kid called me for eyes on the playground. All I know is that, when I was a kid, Daniel wasn't just my brother. He was my compass, my protector, my whole world. We grew up in a small, grayish-blue house in northern Seattle, just a couple blocks from Green Lake. The house was always a little too cold in the winter and a little too hot in the summer, but it held all our memories. Dad, a retired mechanic, and Mom, a nurse who always seemed tired, were strict but caring in their own distant way. But Daniel, he was the warmest part of my childhood. He was 5 years older than me, tall for his age, with wild brown hair that curled at the ends and a dimple that appeared only when he smiled genuinely, which, back then, was often. Teachers loved him. Neighbors greeted him like he was some sort of local celebrity. And to me, he was. He read me bedtime stories in silly voices, taught me how to ride a bike by running beside me until I found balance, and even once built a working model of the solar system for my 4th grade science fair. I got a ribbon for that project, but it was Daniel's patience and creativity that deserved the praise. The world, in my eyes, revolved around Daniel. Every memory from those early years is tinted with his presence. One time, when I was 7, I fell and scraped my knees bad. It wasn't the pain that made me cry, it was the shock, the way blood pooled on the concrete. Daniel picked me up without a word, carried me into the house, cleaned the wounds, and then took a marker and drew a superhero cape on the back of my shirt. "There," he said, smiling. "Even superheroes bleed sometimes." I remember thinking he must be one too. But heroes don't bleed out quietly in their rooms. Back then, I couldn't have known what was coming. None of us did. Daniel, always the straight-A student, the leader of the debate team, the one with college scholarships and Ivy League dreams, suddenly started skipping class. He became quieter, more withdrawn. I'd hear him moving around at night, pacing or just sitting, staring. By the time I was 12, I barely recognized the brother who once filled our house with laughter. He dropped out of college after just 1 semester. Dad took it the hardest. He called Daniel a waste behind closed doors, or sometimes not behind them. Mom tried to keep the peace, her voice always trembling between guilt and exhaustion. I, young and confused, didn't know how to react. The brother who used to read me Where the Wild Things Are now barely left his room. And instead of knocking, I avoided his door altogether. I wish I hadn't. At school, I never talked about Daniel anymore. My classmates asked why he wasn't at Harvard or why he didn't visit the science club anymore. I made excuses. Sometimes I said he was working on something big. Other times I pretended I didn't hear the question. Slowly, I learned to talk around him, to erase him from the story of my life. I was ashamed, though I couldn't admit it at the time. Ashamed that my hero had become a ghost, and that I, his loyal sidekick, had abandoned him when it mattered most. Years passed. I grew taller, grew facial hair, got accepted into a local university, then dropped out to become a journalist. Daniel stayed at home, taking odd jobs when he could. But mostly, he stayed in his room. We barely spoke. When the call came, that call no one ever forgets, I was 24, living alone in a studio apartment filled with books and deadlines. It was Mom. Her voice was hollow. "Daniel's gone." The world didn't spin. It cracked. She said it was an accident. That he'd been out walking near the docks and slipped. That maybe the rain made the wood slippery. That maybe it was just bad luck. But I knew better. Guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't scream or shout. It just sits there, heavy and quiet. Like Daniel used to. It followed me through the funeral. Through the eulogies filled with polite lies. Through the silence of our family dinners where his name was avoided like a curse. I couldn't cry at first. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think I deserved to. I'd left him. I'd turned my back on him. I had watched my hero fall and done nothing to catch him. And yet, In the mess of all that grief and confusion, I returned to our childhood home, to his room. The door still creaked the same way it did when I was 10. His walls were bare, the bed neatly made, like he'd stepped out for groceries instead of forever. That's when I found the box. It was tucked under his bed, beneath piles of old math textbooks and half-finished sketch pads. A shoebox taped shut. Inside were spiral notebooks. Dozens of them. I opened the first one and immediately recognized his handwriting. August 12th, 2016. Ethan laughed today. I told him that stupid joke about the duck and the bar. His eyes lit up. For a moment, the world made sense again. My hands trembled. I flipped to another page. September 9th, 2017. Bad day. Head too loud. But Ethan smiled during dinner. I held onto that like a rope. Maybe it'll pull me out. I kept reading. Page after page. Year after year. Every entry, no matter how dark, found a way to mention me. My laughter. My successes. My bad haircut in sophomore year. My speech at graduation. March 3rd, 2019. They don't see me anymore. But Ethan still exists. As long as he exists, maybe I should too. That's when I broke. I sank to the floor. The notebooks falling around me like leaves. My sobs were loud, ugly, unrestrained. Because now I knew the truth. Even when I had stopped seeing him as my hero, he had never stopped seeing me as his hope. And in that moment, amid the ink and tears and echo of missed chances, I made a promise. I would write him back to life. Chapter 2. The Turning Point at 18. Daniel turned 18 the year I turned 13. I remember thinking, at the time, how far away adulthood seemed. For me, it was still about bike rides through the neighborhood, sleepovers, and wondering if I could get away with skipping gym class. But for Daniel, it was different. Something changed that year, though no one could ever pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was too many expectations stacked too high. Or maybe something inside him had always been quietly unraveling, and we just didn't see it, or chose not to. He had just graduated high school as valedictorian, gave a speech that had the entire auditorium on their feet. I was in the crowd that day, sitting next to my dad, who nodded approvingly as Daniel walked across the stage in his deep blue robe. I remember thinking how invincible he looked. His smile was wide, his handshake with the principal firm, his shoulders squared like a champion. People said he was going places, Princeton maybe. MIT had already offered him early admission. Mom cried happy tears when she read the acceptance letter out loud. Dad slapped Daniel's back so hard it must have hurt. But Daniel didn't say much. He just nodded and gave a half smile. I thought he was just being humble. Looking back, I realized that was the first time I noticed the silence. That summer, he stopped showing up to things. Barbecues, late-night movie runs. Even the family game nights he once dominated with ruthless enthusiasm. He claimed he was tired, that he needed to mentally prepare for college. Everyone bought it. Until he stopped packing. Boxes remained unopened in his room. The suitcase Dad bought for him sat untouched, tags still on. Princeton orientation came and went. Mom started making excuses to family and friends. Dad grew more and more agitated with each passing day. One evening, I walked into Daniel's room. It was late August, the sun just starting to dip, casting a gold glow on the floorboards. Daniel was sitting on the bed, staring at his hands. Just staring. "Are you okay?" I asked, hovering near the door. He didn't look up. "Do you ever feel like the air is too loud?" I blinked. "What?" Daniel shook his head, like he regretted saying anything at all. "Never mind." It wasn't the answer I wanted. But I didn't push him. I simply nodded, said okay, and left the room quietly. Carefully, like walking past a sleeping giant. In the weeks that followed, the house transformed. Or maybe Daniel did. He stayed in his room most days, curtains drawn, lights off. Mom brought him food and left it outside the door. Sometimes he ate. Sometimes he didn't. Dad, meanwhile, began to lose patience. I overheard the arguments at night. Yelling. Accusations. The word lazy thrown around like a rock through glass. He had everything going for him, Linda. Everything. Dad would bark. Mom's voice quieter, I know. But I think he's struggling. Struggling with what? A perfect GPA? No. Something else. I didn't understand mental health then. Not truly. In my head, Daniel was choosing this. Choosing to isolate, to fall apart. It never occurred to me that it was happening to him, not because of him. At school, I started avoiding questions about him. Friends would ask how the genius brother was doing. I'd shrug. He's fine. He wasn't. I stopped knocking on his door. Stopped checking in. There was one night, though, one I still remember clearly. It was late. Maybe 2 a.m. I woke up to get water and noticed his door slightly ajar. Inside, Daniel sat on the floor, back against the wall, scribbling in a notebook by the dim glow of a desk lamp. He looked tired. Hollow-eyed, but peaceful. I thought about going in. Saying something. Anything. But I didn't. I walked back to my room and shut the door. That moment haunts me more than I can explain. The months passed. Daniel didn't leave the house. Dad stopped talking to him altogether. Mom walked around like a ghost. And I, still a teenager, just wanted normalcy. So I did what I thought was easiest. I pretended he didn't exist. I hate that version of me. I hate how quickly I folded into the silence. How easily I abandoned the boy who once carried me home when I scraped my knee. But maybe that's how it happens, not in dramatic confrontations, not in climactic breakups, but in slow, silent turns. One look away, one unanswered knock, one lie to a friend. And then suddenly, a chasm too wide to cross. Years later, I would stand at his funeral and wish I could go back to that night with the notebook. Wish I had walked in, sat beside him, asked what he was writing. Because maybe, just maybe, that could have changed something. Or maybe not. But at least he would have known I still saw him. And sometimes, being seen is all a person really needs. Chapter 3. The Invisible One in His Own Home. For the next few years, Daniel became a shadow in our home. Not in the poetic, nostalgic way, not a gentle presence lingering in memories, but a literal, breathing ghost that everyone tried not to see. At 17, I had my own problems. College applications, hormones. A fragile sense of identity. I was becoming my own person, but every step forward felt like a step further away from my brother. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. He still lived with us. Still occupied the same room at the end of the hallway, but it was like he had slipped into another dimension, one where the lights were always off, the meals went untouched. And the air was too heavy to breathe. No one really spoke about Daniel anymore. Not at the dinner table. Not in passing. Not when relatives came to visit. His name, once spoken with such pride, was now the one topic that could clear a room. I remember one Sunday morning, I came downstairs to find Mom making pancakes, a rare attempt at family normalcy. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. The radio played something cheerful in the background. I sat down, expecting her to call Daniel to join us like she used to. She didn't. After a long pause, I asked quietly, should we see if he wants to eat with us? Her back stiffened. The spatula paused midair. Let's not disturb him. He probably needs rest. He always needs rest, I muttered, not realizing how bitter it sounded. Mom said nothing. Dad walked in a few minutes later, grunted his usual morning greeting, and started eating without a word. He hadn't spoken Daniel's name in over a year. If someone ever asked how many children he had, I suspected he would only say one. I should have said something. Should have stood up for my brother. But I didn't. I didn't have the courage. Daniel's door remained shut most days. When he did emerge, to grab a glass of water, maybe, or pick up a package from the porch, it was brief and quiet. He didn't make eye contact. His shoulders hunched, his step soft, like he was apologizing just for existing. Sometimes we crossed paths in the hallway. And every time, I'd give him a small nod, that awkward, stiff kind of acknowledgement that meant nothing and everything at the same time. He always nodded back. That was the extent of our relationship by then. Two strangers sharing a home, orbiting around one another without colliding. I hated it, but I didn't know how to fix it. One afternoon, I came home from school early and saw Daniel sitting on the front steps. That alone was unusual. It had been months since he'd willingly left his room. He had his arms resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. I hovered at the gate for a moment, unsure if I should approach. I thought about the times he used to walk me to that same spot, tying my shoelaces and telling me to look both ways, little man. It felt like a lifetime ago. Eventually, I walked past him and said, "Nice day, huh?" He didn't reply, just offered a half smile, the kind that made you wonder if it cost more energy to fake than to say nothing at all. I went inside. Later that night, I heard Dad muttering in the kitchen. Just sitting out there like some bum. Doesn't he have anything better to do? Henry, Mom warned softly. What? I'm supposed to pretend this is normal? That it's okay to sit around all day like some leech? He was supposed to be something. He is something, she whispered. Dad scoffed. Yeah? What? That silence, the one that followed, was worse than shouting. Worse than any insult. It was a verdict. Final and cruel. I saw Daniel's bedroom light go off minutes later. I never asked if he heard the conversation. I didn't need to. His door stayed shut for the rest of the week. By the time I graduated high school, Daniel had faded so far into the background that I often caught myself forgetting he was even there. Not because I stopped caring, but because it hurt too much to remember what he used to be. The boy who once read me books with exaggerated voices, who taught me how to whistle, who defended me on the schoolyard, he was gone. In his place was someone else. Someone fragile. Someone hollow. Someone I couldn't understand and didn't know how to help. And so, like the rest of the family, I chose avoidance. I got into a journalism program at a community college in Seattle. Moved into a small apartment downtown. Started a new chapter, one that didn't include family dinners or the hallway where Daniel used to tape up comic book pages like wallpaper. Still, whenever I visited home, his presence weighed heavy in the air. I'd pass his door and feel a pulse of guilt, like a bruise I kept pressing just to see if it still hurt. It always did. One night, home for winter break, I walked quietly down the hall to grab a glass of water. His door was ajar, just slightly. Inside, I could see the soft blue glow of a computer screen and Daniel sitting at his desk, typing something. I don't know what made me do it, but I stopped and watched for a moment. He didn't look different. His hair was longer, yes, and he wore thick glasses now, but it was still him. Still Daniel. Then, as if sensing me, he turned slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. We didn't say a word. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But instead, I looked away and walked back to my room. That was the last time I ever saw him alive. Chapter 4, The 3 a.m. Call. It was a cold Tuesday in February when the phone rang. I remember the time exactly, 3:08 a.m. Because I had just finished writing a late-night column about a city council scandal. The apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when everyone else in the world is asleep and you're still wide awake with too much on your mind. The phone vibrated once, then again. The screen flashed, "Mom." And in that instant, I knew. Not because of any strange intuition or supernatural sense, but because no one calls at 3 a.m. with good news. I answered. Her voice was barely above a whisper, cracking with something more than exhaustion. "Ethan." I held my breath. "It's Daniel." I didn't ask what happened. I didn't need to. Her silence told me everything. Still, I heard myself ask anyway. My voice foreign and hollow. "What do you mean?" "There was an accident," she said, as if practicing the word for the first time. He went out for a walk. Near the waterfront. The police think he slipped. Her voice broke. He didn't come back. I closed my eyes. The silence stretched out between us, cold and sharp like broken glass. "I'm coming home," I whispered, already pulling on my coat. I don't remember much of the drive back to my parents' house. Just flashes, the pale orange glow of the highway lights, the buzzing in my ears. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought I'd leave permanent imprints. Seattle, normally full of night sounds, cars, sirens, the occasional drunk laughter, felt dead. When I pulled into the driveway, I half expected to see Daniel sitting on the porch steps again. Legs crossed, notebook in hand. Maybe looking up at the sky like he used to, murmuring things like, "Do you think stars are lonelier than us?" But the steps were empty. The house was dark. Inside, everything was exactly the same photos on the walls. The same smell of old wood and lavender detergent. Except now, it felt like something had been surgically removed. A silence deeper than absence. Mom sat on the living room couch, wrapped in the same old gray sweater she always wore when worried. Her hands were clasped, trembling. Dad stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tightly it looked like stone. No one said anything for a full minute. Then Mom looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and whispered, "He's really gone, Ethan." I sank to the floor beside her and held her as she cried. We didn't talk about the details that night. How the police said Daniel likely lost his balance on the slick wooden walkway. How he wasn't discovered until the next morning by a jogger. How there was no note, no message. But even without those things, we knew. And that's the part no one tells you, that sometimes grief isn't loud or theatrical. Sometimes it's quiet, paralyzing. It sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The funeral was small. Just immediate family, a few distant relatives, and one or two people from Daniel's past who still remembered who he used to be. Mom insisted on a simple service. No big speeches. No floral overload. Just a closed casket, a pastor reading Psalm 23, and the awkward shuffle of people trying to find words they didn't have. I couldn't speak. Dad didn't either. But I saw him wipe his eyes once, quickly, like it betrayed him. After everyone left, I lingered by Daniel's grave long after the sun dipped below the horizon. The cemetery lights buzzed faintly in the distance. I knelt down, fingers brushing the fresh dirt. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The wind didn't answer. I don't know what I expected, maybe some sign, some flicker of forgiveness. Instead, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket soaked in guilt. That night, back at the house, I couldn't sleep. Every room echoed with memories. The hallway seemed longer, colder. His bedroom door, closed as always, suddenly felt like a portal I was too afraid to open. But I had to. I stood in front of it for a long time, my hand hovering over the knob. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then, slowly, I pushed it open. The room smelled faintly of old paper and eucalyptus. His bed was made. Desk neatly arranged. Curtains drawn shut. A quiet shrine to a life that had paused years ago. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a letter. Maybe a goodbye. Instead, I found the shoebox under his bed. It was taped closed. Heavy. I sat down cross-legged and peeled it open. Inside were notebooks, a dozen of them, maybe more. Each one dated. Each one full of Daniel's handwriting. I flipped to a random page. January 6th, 2020. Ethan called Mom today to tell her he got published again. She was so proud. I could hear her smiling through the walls. I didn't say anything, but I was proud too. My chest tightened. I turned another page. June 18th, 2021. It's been hard lately. The voices in my head are loud again. But Ethan came by last weekend. He didn't say much, but he nodded. He saw me. That was enough. That has to be enough. My hands trembled. Page after page, entry after entry, there I was. Always. Even in his darkest moments, Daniel clung to me. My achievements. My voice. My laughter. October 30th, 2022. He doesn't see me anymore. Not really. But I still see him. That's what big brothers do, right? Keep watching. Even from far away. That's when the dam broke. I wept uncontrollably. Knees drawn to my chest, the notebook scattered around me like petals of a wilted flower. My sobs echoed against the walls that had once held bedtime stories and whispered jokes. Daniel had never stopped caring. Even when I did. Even when I turned away. Even when I let the world define him by what he wasn't, instead of what he still was. He had held on to memories to love. To me. And I hadn't even noticed. But I would now. I would make them notice. Chapter 5. The Box Beneath the Bed. The next morning, I woke up on Daniel's bedroom floor, still surrounded by his notebooks. My eyes were swollen, my body sore, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Grief, I've learned, is not linear. It doesn't follow a schedule. One moment you're numb, and the next, you're burning with rage at yourself, and then, just as suddenly, filled with a determination that feels foreign in your own skin. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples as the weight of the previous night settled in again. I looked around his room, not just at it, but into it, as if trying to meet him there. The shelves were dusty but organized. A row of science fiction books stood neatly beside thick psychology texts. Above the desk, he had pinned an old poster of Carl Sagan with the quote, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." That hit harder than I expected. I reached for the box again. This time, I pulled out the notebooks one by one, lining them up in order by year. The earliest one was dated 2016, the year he graduated high school. The last, only half-filled, stopped in 2023, a few weeks before he died. 7 years of entries. 7 years of pain. 7 years of him trying to hold on. And no one knew. I opened the 2016 journal, flipped to the first page, and started reading from the beginning. May 23, 2016. Graduation day. Everyone clapped, smiled, called me the future of the family. I felt hollow. I wanted to run. But Ethan waved at me from the crowd, big grin, eyes wide. He believes in me. Maybe that's enough for now. My throat tightened. I kept reading. Some entries were short, others pages long. Some were filled with darkness so thick I had to stop and breathe. But every now and then, there were glimmers, moments where Daniel caught a breath of light, a walk in the rain, a conversation with Mom, an old song he rediscovered. And always, there was me. His journals didn't just document a decline. They were letters. Letters he never sent. A record of someone trying desperately not to disappear. That afternoon, I carried the box downstairs. Mom was sitting at the dining table, nursing a cold cup of coffee. She looked older than I remembered, not just tired, but worn. The kind of wear that settles in the bones. "I found these," I said gently, placing the box in front of her. She looked at it, then at me, then back again. Her fingers hovered above the lid before slowly lifting it. The first notebook was on top, with Daniel's name and the word private written in block letters. "I didn't know he kept journals," she whispered. Neither did I. She picked one up, opened it, and began to read. I watched her face shift, confusion, surprise, pain, guilt all washing over her in waves. Tears welled in her eyes. "He wrote about me." I nodded. "He wrote about all of us. But mostly, about me." I sat down beside her. "He didn't stop loving us, Mom," I said. "He didn't shut down because he wanted to hurt us. He was hurting and he didn't know how to say it." She covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "I used to think he gave up," I added. "But now I see. He was fighting every single day. We just didn't see the war." We sat in silence for a while, flipping through the pages together. Later that evening, I approached Dad. He was outside, fixing a broken garden lamp. His way of mourning had always been physical: fix something, clean something, do something. I waited until he noticed me. "Dad," I said quietly, "I need you to read something." He looked up, frowning. "What is it?" "Daniel's journals." He froze, screwdriver still in hand. "I don't want to." "You should," I interrupted. "You need to." There was a long pause. Finally, he stood, dusted off his jeans, and nodded once. Back in the house, I handed him one of the more recent notebooks, the one where Daniel wrote, August 14th, 2022. I wish Dad would talk to me again, even if it's to yell. Silence feels worse. Like I already died. And he just forgot to bury me. I saw Dad's jaw clench as he read. A muscle twitched near his temple. "He still loved you," I said. "He just didn't know how to reach you anymore." Dad didn't respond. He turned and walked away, notebook still in hand. That night, I heard his door shut softly, not slammed like usual. The next morning, he left the journal on the kitchen counter. A sticky note attached. I didn't know. I'm sorry. And just like that, the silence began to break. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. Reading Daniel's words had stirred something deep inside, something that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a human story. One that needed to be told. Daniel deserved more than a box under a bed. He deserved to be seen. To be heard. To be remembered as he really was, not as a disappointment or a burden. But as a person who fought quietly for years, for love, for connection, for the right to exist. I opened my laptop and started a new document. Title: The Light I Left Behind. I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I began to write. Not as a brother trying to redeem himself, but as a storyteller giving his hero back the voice the world had taken away. Chapter 6. Every page a pulse. The blinking cursor on my screen reminded me of a heartbeat. It pulsed steadily, waiting for words, waiting for me to tell the story I had ignored for too long. I stared at it for hours, letting Daniel's notebooks lie open beside me on the desk like lifelines. There were underlined sentences, doodles in the margins, the occasional coffee stain. Each mark was evidence. He had lived. He had felt deeply. And he had fought quietly every day for a reason to keep going. And I had to be that reason now. I began typing. My brother didn't die when he slipped on the dock at Green Lake. He died in pieces. Quietly. First, when he stopped being the golden boy. Then, when we stopped seeing him as a person. Finally, when we stopped speaking his name. The words came faster than I expected, angry, raw, but also full of love. I didn't try to sound polished or professional. I wasn't writing an article for a newspaper. I was writing a resurrection. I was digging through my own guilt and grief and pulling Daniel back into the light. For the next few days, I barely ate. I barely slept. I wrote. Each morning, I returned to Daniel's notebooks like a ritual. I opened one, chose a random page, and read it aloud to myself before writing. It felt like communion. A way to keep him close while I translated his pain into something the world could understand. March 11th, 2018. Ethan started growing facial hair. I teased him about the weird patch under his chin. And he laughed. Real laughter. Like when we were kids. I think I lived off that sound for 3 days straight. I smiled through tears. He had remembered the little things. Moments I had long forgotten. And somehow, even while he was sinking, he had clung to me, to my laughter, my achievements, my very existence, like a lifeline. The more I read, the more I realized. Daniel didn't disappear. We let go. And I wouldn't let it happen again. I compiled the best entries. I added my own reflections, pieces of my guilt, memories of our childhood. Small snapshots of our home life that hadn't made it into the journals. I called the manuscript The Light I Left Behind, a title that haunted me in all the right ways. Rachel was the first person I sent it to. She was an editor at a cultural magazine in Seattle, a classmate of Daniel's from high school, though they hadn't spoken in years. She had once told me. At his funeral, he was brilliant, you know. Not just smart, like, soul-deep brilliant. Her response came within 24 hours. Ethan, this broke me. And healed me. And broke me again. You have to publish this. Not just for Daniel, for everyone who's ever felt invisible. Those words gave me strength. We met in a coffee shop the next day. Rachel wore a faded denim jacket and no makeup, like always. She slid the printed manuscript across the table and looked me in the eye. This could change lives, she said. You realize that, right? I shook my head. I'm not trying to change lives. I just want to make sure his wasn't wasted. Rachel leaned back in her chair. You're doing both. We brainstormed how to share the story. A book deal would take months, maybe years, and I couldn't wait that long. It felt urgent. He felt urgent. So Rachel suggested something simple, an excerpt. A piece of Daniel's journal. Paired with my reflection, published online. Something raw. Something real. Something that people could share. That night, I chose a passage and wrote a brief foreword. Journal excerpt, December 12th, 2020. I heard Ethan on the phone today. He was telling someone about a story he wrote. His voice sounded proud, confident, alive. I wonder if he knows that his life gives mine meaning even now. Even in the quiet. Even in the dark. My words. My brother, Daniel, died last month. But not before spending 7 years fighting to hold on to dignity, to identity to me. We thought he had disappeared. But he was writing. Every single day. This is one page. There are hundreds more. And it's time we started reading them. I posted it on Medium. Rachel helped me format it and attach a photo, an old picture of Daniel in his debate team blazer, smiling like he still believed the world was his. I hit publish and closed the laptop. Then I waited. The first comment came an hour later. Then 10. Then hundreds. By morning, the post had gone viral. People wrote in from all over the country, some from other continents. They shared stories of their own Daniels. Sons, daughters, siblings, friends, people who had once been golden lights and then disappeared into silence. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. More importantly, Daniel wasn't alone. People were seeing him. Finally, I walked into the kitchen the next morning to find Mom sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "There's a woman from Minnesota," she said. She lost her son 3 years ago. She said reading Daniel's words helped her sleep for the first time since. I sat down across from her. "He would have liked that," I said softly. Mom nodded. "I think he'd be proud." Just then, Dad walked in, holding one of the printed pages. He looked uncomfortable, awkward in the way men like him often are when emotions are involved. "I read the post," he said. I held my breath. He stared at the paper in his hands for a long moment, then finally looked up. He was a good writer. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in our house, that counted as a miracle. Chapter 7. Letters Never Sent. I didn't expect the letters. After the post went viral, my inbox overflowed with messages from strangers. Some were simple, a line or two of gratitude. Others were confessions. People revealing secrets they had carried alone for years. Messages from survivors, from grieving parents, from brothers and sisters like me who had watched someone they loved slowly slip out of reach. But then there were the letters handwritten, mailed to my family's address. Scrawled on yellowed notebook paper, hotel stationery, even napkins. Letters addressed not to me, but to Daniel. "Dear Daniel, I wish I had met you. Daniel. Your words saved me from making a choice I might not have come back from. Daniel, thank you for saying the thing I've never been able to say out loud." They came from everywhere: California, Ohio, Toronto, Berlin. People who had never known my brother were now mourning him, speaking to him, loving him in ways we never thought possible while he was still alive. Mom started collecting them in a binder. She labeled it Letters for Daniel. It sat on the coffee table like a new family album, one filled not with photographs, but with the voices of 1,000 strangers echoing the same message: you mattered. One evening, as snow fell quietly outside the living room window, I sat beside that binder and opened a few at random. My hands trembled the way they used to when I held his notebooks. But this time, the trembling didn't come from grief. It came from awe. "Dear Daniel, I'm 19, living in my parents' basement, and most days I feel like I'm slowly disappearing. But when I read your words about holding on just to hear your brother laugh, it reminded me that I still have a little sister who looks up to me too. I think I'll stay a while longer. Kenny, New Jersey." I read it aloud. Mom covered her mouth. That's what Daniel wanted, Ethan. That's all he ever wanted, to be heard. To help. And suddenly, it clicked. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a mission. I started compiling Daniel's journals into a manuscript, carefully, respectfully, interwoven with my own commentary. Each chapter began with one of his entries, followed by my memories, reflections, and the letters people had sent. It became a conversation between past and present, between the boy who once believed he was invisible, and the world that now couldn't stop seeing him. Rachel helped edit the book. We worked through nights, both of us powered by coffee and purpose. She said, "This isn't just memoir. This is legacy." When the publishing house finally accepted our proposal, they didn't just agree to print the book, they wanted to launch it. A full campaign. Public readings. Interviews. Bookstore appearances. I hesitated at first. The idea of speaking aloud about Daniel, about my own guilt, about the years of silence, made me feel exposed. Vulnerable. But I remembered what Daniel had written. Maybe someone will read this someday. Maybe they'll see what I couldn't say out loud. Maybe they'll stay. If I stayed silent now, I'd be failing him all over again. So I agreed. The first reading was at a local bookstore in downtown Seattle. The place was packed. People sat shoulder to shoulder, some holding copies of the book, others clutching folded printouts of the original post. I stepped up to the microphone, heart hammering in my chest, and opened the book to the entry I'd chosen. Journal entry, April 9th, 2019. Ethan called today, just to say hi. It was 2 minutes long, but it felt like someone opened a window. I breathed better that day. I looked up, scanning the crowd. My brother never asked for much. I said, he didn't want fame or fortune. He just wanted to know he wasn't forgotten. That his life meant something. That he mattered. A few people in the crowd wiped their eyes. And here we are. I continued, proving that he did. After the reading, a young woman came up to me. She couldn't have been older than 20. "I lost my sister to depression last year," she said. She kept a journal too. I never read it. I was afraid. But after reading about Daniel, I think I will. I hugged her. That night, for the first time in a long time. I didn't dream about the night Daniel died. I dreamed about the summer he taught me how to ride a bike, how he ran beside me, arms ready to catch, cheering me on until I found my balance. I could still hear his voice. "You got it, little man. Keep going." I woke up smiling through tears. He had been running beside me all along. Chapter 8. The View from the Dock. It took me 3 weeks to return to the dock where Daniel died. I kept putting it off, telling myself I was too busy with the book launch or the interviews, or the stack of letters still waiting to be read. But deep down, I knew I wasn't avoiding the place. I was avoiding the moment. The reckoning. The truth. I wasn't ready to stand where he stood. Until one gray Sunday morning, with Seattle skies hanging low and the wind smelling like rain, I found myself driving to Green Lake. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't bring my phone. I just went. The park was mostly empty. A few joggers, a family with 2 kids throwing breadcrumbs to the ducks, and an elderly man walking a golden retriever who moved slower than him. I kept my head down and walked along the paved path, following the curve of the lake until I reached the familiar wooden dock stretching out into the water. It looked ordinary. That's what unsettled me the most. How normal it all seemed. Just wood and water and the gentle lapping of ripples against the edge. Nothing about it screamed tragedy or finality. But I felt it in my bones, the ghost of a last step, a final thought, a heart too tired to keep beating. I stepped onto the dock and walked to the very end. My shoes creaked on the wet planks. I sat down, legs dangling over the side, the cold biting at my ankles. I took a deep breath. This was it. This was where my brother's story, the one the world knew, had ended. But this was also where my story with him began again. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out one of his notebooks, the last one, the one he never finished. The pages were fewer. The handwriting messier, but still distinctly Daniel. I flipped to the very last entry, dated just 10 days before he died. December 9th, 2023. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to float. Not sink. Just float. Weightless. Like everything heavy finally lets go. But then I remember Ethan's laugh. I remember how he used to clap when I read him stories. I remember how he looked at me like I could fly. Maybe that version of me still exists. Somewhere. Maybe not in this world. But maybe in his. My throat closed up. I whispered into the wind, "You do. Daniel. You still exist. In every page. In every voice that's been moved by your words. In me." I reached into the bag beside me and pulled out a small jar. Inside it were scraps of letters, the ones people had sent addressed to him. I'd printed and cut out a handful of them, folding each one gently like a prayer. I opened the jar and tipped it over the edge. The pieces floated for a moment, caught on the wind, then scattered across the water like paper boats, like falling petals, like promises finally released. One landed on the surface and stuck there. I could just barely read the first line. Dear Daniel, I see you now. I stayed there until the wind picked up and the sun peeked through the clouds, soft and brief. As I stood to leave, I glanced down at the dock again. My shadow stretched long behind me. And for the first time since he died, I didn't feel alone. Back at home, I placed the last notebook back in the box and sealed it gently. Mom had cleared a shelf in the living room, just for Daniel. His books, a framed photo of him at 17 in his debate team suit, and a small plaque we had made. Daniel Miller, our light, our voice. Our story. Dad didn't say much about the dock. But that night, I saw him standing at the shelf, tracing the edge of Daniel's picture frame with his thumb. He didn't notice I was there. He whispered, I'm sorry, kiddo. And for Daniel's sake, I whispered back, he heard you. The next morning, Rachel called. She was breathless. You're not going to believe this. The book just hit the bestseller list. Nationally. I smiled. Not because of the charts, but because I could almost hear Daniel laughing, that quiet, proud, slightly self-deprecating laugh of his. I looked at the final draft of the book in my hands, and added one more line to the dedication. To the boy who thought no one was listening. The whole world hears you now. Chapter 9. First draft, second chance. I used to think healing came in one perfect moment, a kind of emotional sunrise, clean and bright, where all the pain melted away. But it doesn't. Healing is messier than that. It comes in waves, in fragments, in half-finished drafts and second tries. And sometimes, it begins not with the right words, but with any words at all. After the visit to the dock, I returned to the manuscript one final time. I sat at my desk, surrounded by highlighters and sticky notes and half-drunk mugs of coffee. Rachel had sent me her notes in a Google Doc, little green comments like, this hits hard, or consider cutting here for pacing, or simply beautiful. Her edits were thoughtful. But she made it clear, the heart of it was already there. Now it was my turn to shape the final version. Not just for the publisher, not for the press, but for Daniel. The first sentence had always been the hardest to get right. I had rewritten it 37 times, no exaggeration. It started as a headline, then a memory, then a quote. But none of them felt like him. Until now. I stared at the blank line above Chapter 1 and whispered, okay, Dan. One more time. Just us. Then I typed. My brother used to say he felt invisible. But I see him now. And maybe, if I do this right, you will too. It stayed. I began organizing the book thematically, not chronologically. Each chapter revolved around something Daniel had struggled with: loneliness, shame, family, silence, hope. Under each theme, I placed Daniel's entries and paired them with my own writing memories, insights, or just honest reactions. Some entries broke me again, even after I'd read them a dozen times. June 3rd, 2020. Mom made spaghetti tonight. She asked if I wanted Parmesan. She looked me in the eye. It was small, but it was everything. I think she still sees me, even if only in pieces. Others gave me something unexpected: laughter. September 14th, 2017. I tried meditating. Lasted 5 minutes before I started worrying that I was doing it wrong. So then I spent another 10 minutes meditating about my failed meditation. Progress? I imagined him rolling his eyes at himself and I laughed. Out loud. Daniel had been funny. Not in the performative way, but in that dry, soft, blink and you'll miss it way. It felt like I was discovering new parts of him. Like we were talking again. And this time, I was listening. Each chapter ended with a reflection from me. Honest, raw, not always polished. Because that's what grief is. That's what guilt is. And that's what love, at its truest, becomes when you've run out of chances. 2 weeks later, I submitted the final manuscript. The publishing team sent back the full cover mock-up a few days after that. It was simple, dark navy with white serif lettering. The title, The Light I Left Behind. Below it, A silhouette of a boy looking out over a quiet lake. Subtle, haunting, beautiful. Mom cried when she saw it. I always wanted the world to see how good he was, she said. Now they can. Even Dad, the man who had once avoided Daniel's name like it was a bruise he couldn't touch, kept a copy on the nightstand. I caught him reading it once before bed. When he noticed me, he said nothing, just gave a small, respectful nod. That nod said more than 1,000 apologies. On launch day, the publisher hosted a small event at a local bookstore, the same one where I had done the first public reading months ago. They had printed posters, arranged chairs, brought in coffee and pastries. But I barely noticed any of it. I kept thinking of Daniel, wondering what he would have worn, what he would have said, if he'd have teased me for getting emotional in front of a crowd. Before the reading began, I pulled out a small photo of us when we were kids, Daniel with his arm around my shoulder, both of us grinning, eyes squinting into the sun. I tucked it inside the front cover of the reading copy. And then I stood at the podium. Thank you all for being here, I began, voice shaking just a little. This book is not just about mental illness. It's not just about grief or guilt or family. It's about remembrance. About recognition. About what happens when we finally see someone who thought they were invisible. I paused, then opened to a favorite entry. July 27th, 2018. Sometimes I think if I vanished, it would take days for anyone to notice. But then Ethan came into my room today just to ask if I'd seen his charger. It wasn't much, but he looked at me when he asked. And in that 1 second, I was real again. I looked up, and every single face in the audience was watching. Really watching. Just like I wished I had done more of when he was alive. When I left the bookstore that night, I stood under the stars for a long time. The cold nipped at my skin, but I didn't care. I looked up. I hope you're floating, Dan, I whispered. Not sinking. Not fading. Just floating, weightless. And finally free. And for the first time in years, I felt light enough to float, too. Chapter 10. A shelf with his name. It started with a shelf. A small one. Just 3 tiers. Made of old pine wood. Mom found it at a flea market on a Sunday and brought it home, dusting it like it was a sacred heirloom. I thought maybe. She trailed off, fingers running along the top ledge. We could use this for Daniel. She didn't need to say more. We carried it into the living room together and set it near the window, the one that caught the softest light in the afternoon, where Daniel used to sit and read before everything went quiet. There, we began to build a space just for him. Not a shrine, exactly. More like a conversation we finally felt ready to have. A way to keep him in the room with us, not as the memory we used to avoid, but as the person we were learning to honor. On the top shelf, we placed a framed photo, Daniel at 17. Holding a trophy from the regional debate finals, his smile half proud, half shy, the way he always looked when he wasn't sure if he deserved the applause. Beside it, one of his notebooks. Open to a page that read, "Even on my worst days, I wanted to be someone worth remembering." Below that, a stack of books he loved, Vonnegut, Asimov, and a worn paperback of Siddhartha, full of underlined lines and scribbled notes in the margins. And on the bottom shelf, we added a candle. We lit it every Sunday evening. Sometimes we sat around it in silence. Sometimes we shared a story. One time, Mom played a voicemail from Daniel she had saved, his voice gentle, asking if she needed anything from the store. The 3 of us laughed at how he called frozen pizza a survival tool. It was the kind of laughter that aches. But it was healing too. The book started gaining attention outside of Seattle. A review in The Atlantic called it a brutal, lyrical act of witness. Another called Daniel the voice of the unheard. That phrase stuck with me. The voice of the unheard. It was exactly who he had been, and now, finally, exactly who he was becoming to others. Readers began to share their own shelves. People sent photos from across the country. Small tables with candles, books stacked in honor of someone they had lost, photos and letters arranged like offerings. They called them Daniel's shelves. I cried the first time I saw one. Because I realized then, his story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the world now. And it was making the world softer, kinder, braver. One quiet evening, I found Dad standing by the shelf in our living room, just staring. He didn't notice me at first. He was holding Daniel's trophy, running his fingers along the base like he was remembering what it had cost. I walked in slowly, unsure whether to speak. But then he said, without looking at me, "I used to think silence was strength. That if I didn't talk about the pain, it wouldn't exist." He set the trophy down carefully. I was wrong. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I didn't know how to love him once he stopped being who I wanted him to be," Dad said quietly. "But now I see, he was never less. Just different. And I should have met him there." It was the closest he had ever come to saying I loved him. And it was enough. That weekend, we held a small event at the community center, a night for Daniel. People came from across the state. There were readings, music, and a wall where guests could write messages to those they had lost. I opened the evening with one of Daniel's earliest entries. May 10th, 2016. Ethan asked me to help him write a story for school. We sat on the floor, surrounded by paper, and he told me he wanted to be a journalist one day. I told him he already was because he saw things other people didn't. I hope he never stops seeing. As I read those words, something shifted in me. For so long, I had carried guilt like a second spine. I thought I had failed Daniel in the worst way, but he never saw it like that. He had believed in me, even when I forgot how to believe in him. Maybe that's what love really is. Seeing someone in their wholeness, not just their best parts, not just their victories, but their weight, their shadow, their breaking points. And choosing to stay anyway. When I returned home that night, I sat by the shelf one more time. The candle flickered softly. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. I placed a new item on the top tier, a signed copy of the light I left behind. The dedication page read, "For Daniel, the first story I ever loved, and the one that taught me how to tell the truth." I sat there in the glow of that small flame, remembering the boy who used to chase monsters from under my bed, who used to call me little man, who used to believe, in spite of everything, that laughter could keep him alive. And I realized he had left something behind. Not just journals, but a light. And this time, I wouldn't let it fade. Chapter 11. The interview I wasn't ready for. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Just another interview, another radio show wanting to talk about the book. Rachel said it would be light. A human interest segment for a popular morning program in Chicago, syndicated across the country, but known more for fluff than depth. 10 minutes, max, she said. They'll probably ask about your writing process, favorite coffee shop, what your next project is. Easy. I believed her. What I didn't expect was for them to bring up Daniel, not just generally. Not in the usual careful, respectful way, but directly. Raw. And unfiltered. The show was live. I sat in the studio, headphones on, microphone a little too close to my mouth. Palms sweating through the sleeves of my denim jacket. The host, a cheerful woman named Bethany, welcomed me with a warm smile and dove right in. "So Ethan, the light I left behind is topping bestseller lists, sparking conversations about mental health, and helping so many families heal," she said. "It's personal, it's powerful. And I have to ask, did you ever feel like your brother's story was too painful to share?" The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't even wrong. But it hit like a brick. I hesitated. Yes, all the time. Bethany leaned forward. Then why share it at all? For a moment, the studio buzzed in silence. I looked down at the table. My fingers tapped a nervous rhythm. I had rehearsed dozens of answers for interviews, polished, thoughtful, emotionally tidy. But none of them felt right now. So I told the truth. Because not telling it felt worse, I said. Because silence was what killed him. Not all at once, but slowly over years. We didn't talk about how he was feeling. We didn't ask. We didn't listen. I didn't listen. Bethany's smile softened. I continued, voice thick. My brother was the kind of person who noticed everything, the way light filtered through curtains, the pauses between words. When someone laughed, but didn't really mean it. But no one noticed him. Not enough. Not in the ways that mattered. I took a breath. Sharing his story was the only way I knew how to give him back the dignity we all forgot to offer him while he was still here. Bethany didn't respond right away. Then she reached across the table and pressed her hand gently to mine. "Thank you for that," she said. "And thank you for not cleaning it up for us. A lot of people needed to hear that." We finished the interview. It only lasted 12 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. That afternoon, I received an email from a listener in Kansas City. It simply read, "My son is still alive. I almost gave up on reaching him. Your interview changed that. Thank you." I stared at it for a long time. It was one sentence, but it pulsed with everything I had hoped the book could do, not just remember Daniel, but save someone else's Daniel before it was too late. Later that evening, I walked by the shelf in our living room. The candle had burned low. Mom had added a small clay figure to the top, a silly little alien with one eye, something Daniel had sculpted in art class when he was 15. I chuckled. On the bottom tier, nestled beside his books, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart stopped. I picked it up and turned it over. It was Daniel's handwriting. Mom came in just as I sat down. "I found it in his closet," she said softly. "He must have written it near the end." I didn't open it. "I thought it was for you to read." I nodded, suddenly breathless. With shaking hands, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I guess I'm not around anymore. Don't feel guilty, seriously. I know you, and I know you're probably tearing yourself up right now. So stop. I was never angry at you. Not once. You were my light, little man. Even when I was falling apart, you were the one thing that still made sense. The one sound that kept me tethered to the world. I want you to know something. You didn't fail me. The world's loudest lie is that we're only as valuable as what we accomplish. That if we're broken, we're less. I believed that lie for too long. I hope you won't. You have a gift. You always did. You see things deeply. You write like you're trying to stitch the world back together. Keep doing that. Tell the truth. Even when it's messy. Especially then. Love. Daniel." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. And in the quiet of our home, with the candle flickering, with the notebook still open to his words, with my mother standing beside me and my father reading quietly in the other room, I felt something subtle. Not closure. Not quite peace. But something steady. Something like forgiveness. Something like love, still moving forward. Chapter 12. The Museum of Small Things. It started with a shoelace. Frayed at the tips, knotted 3 times in the middle, a relic from years ago. Tucked in the back of Daniel's old dresser drawer. I found it one afternoon while helping Mom finally sort through his things. We had put it off for months. Too afraid that touching his belongings might somehow erase him, or worse, leave us unchanged. But when I held the shoelace, I didn't feel grief. I felt presence. I remembered the story instantly. How Daniel had spent half an hour teaching me how to tie my shoes, only for me to tie them into a bird's nest of frustration. I was 5, crying, and he knelt down and tied one for me, then handed me this magic practice lace. He said, "Once this one behaves, your shoes will too." I ended up carrying it in my pocket for a week. Now, decades later, it had found its way back to me. "Let's keep this," I said to Mom, placing it gently in a small wooden box on the coffee table. She nodded, smiling through a quiet tear. And, just like that, the idea began. A space not to mourn Daniel, but to remember him, not with grand gestures, but with the smallest pieces of who he was. We called it the Museum of Small Things. It wasn't a real museum, of course. Just a repurposed bookcase in the family den. But every item we added felt sacred. Each one held a story only we knew. It was healing in miniature. Top shelf, the shoelace. Now framed in a small glass cube. Beside it, a cassette tape of Daniel's first mix, labeled for Road Trips, Volume 1, full of Queen, Bowie, and a surprise interlude of Yoda quotes. He once said he believed Yoda was the wisest therapist in the universe. Middle shelf, a broken chess piece, the knight, Daniel's favorite. He always said it moved like it was dancing. L-shaped courage, he called it. There was also the wristband from a science fair, a single dried marigold from our front yard, his favorite flower, and an old fortune cookie slip taped to a notebook. You are more than you believe and braver than you feel. Bottom shelf, a pencil stub, worn almost to the nub. It looked insignificant, but it was the one he had used for most of his journals. I remembered it from his desk, always chewed at the end, always in his left hand, scribbling in quiet defiance of a world that stopped asking him questions. Every time I added something new, I wrote a tiny card for it, just a line or two, like a Real museum would. Shoelace, for the day he taught me how to loop, swoop, and pull. Night piece, because courage doesn't always move in straight lines. Marigold, the flower that came back every year, even when we forgot to water it. We didn't need photos or plaques, just these small anchors of memory. I started sharing some of the items online one at a time, with short captions. I wasn't trying to go viral. I just wanted people to see the kind of details Daniel had loved. The tiny, forgotten things that made up a life. But the posts resonated. Soon, people were tagging me in their own small museums. Some recreated the idea for their lost loved ones. Others made them for themselves, collections of objects that reminded them they were still here, still becoming. One comment stood out. This made me cry. My brother loved peppermints. I found one in his winter coat after he passed. It's in my drawer now. I think I'll give it a label. I replied, that's exactly it. It's not just candy. It's memory. It's love, crystallized. One evening, I found Dad standing in front of the shelf, holding a baseball, scuffed, yellowing, the seams nearly frayed. Daniel caught this at a Mariners game, he said quietly, not turning to me. He was 10. I remember him holding it like it was the moon. I wanted to take a picture, but the camera jammed. He didn't care. Said he'd remember it better without one. He placed it gently on the shelf, beside the pencil stub. I reached for a card and wrote, baseball, the night the sky gave him something back. Dad didn't say anything else. He just stood there a while longer. But when he walked away, his shoulders were a little straighter. Rachel came by a week later. She stood in front of the shelf, silent, then said, you know, this is what grief should look like. Not polished. Not packaged. Just honest. Just held. I handed her a tiny glass dome we hadn't used yet. She smiled and placed inside it an old concert ticket stub from a local indie band she and Daniel used to love. I forgot I still had this, she said. He made me swear not to tell anyone he cried during the encore. But he did. Twice. We wrote, concert stub, for the boy who cried when guitars told the truth. The Museum of Small Things became more than a shelf. It became a ritual. A way to remember that people don't leave all at once. They linger in objects, in sounds, in smells. They wait in pockets. In drawers, in notebooks, and dreams. And when we gather those pieces, no matter how small, we carry them forward. We give them a place to stay. One night, I sat in front of the shelf alone. I lit the candle. And I whispered to Daniel, I see you in everything now. And this time I won't look away. Chapter 13, When Silence Speaks. Our family used to be full of noise. Not the joyful kind, like laughter over pancakes or music blasting during spring cleaning. No, our noise was more jagged. Chairs scraping too hard against the floor. Doors closing just a little too fast. The thud of heavy footsteps heading up the stairs after another conversation that ended in frustration. But in the months after Daniel's death, and after the book, and after the shelf, the house grew quieter. And somehow it wasn't uncomfortable. It was intentional. Silence, I realized, isn't always absence. Sometimes it's space. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to let a moment echo until you understand what it's trying to say. One Thursday evening, I came home to find Mom standing at the kitchen sink, staring at the window. She wasn't crying. Just still. What are you thinking about? I asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, he used to stand right there. When he didn't want to be noticed. I think he liked watching the neighbor's porch lights turn on. I stood beside her. We watched together for a moment. And sure enough, a porch light across the street blinked on. Then another. Mom smiled softly. He once told me, she whispered, that he liked to imagine each light was someone deciding to stay a little longer. Another hour of hope, he said. My chest tightened. I rested a hand on her shoulder. And we stood there in that silence, not the kind that separates people, but the kind that holds them close. That same week, I visited Dad in the garage. He had returned to his old hobby of restoring things, radios, clocks, whatever he could get his hands on. This time it was a broken typewriter from the 1960s. He was hunched over it, careful with the parts, the kind of focus that reminded me of Daniel with his pencils and notebooks. You know, Dad said, not looking up, he would have loved this machine. I think so too. He paused, one hand frozen over the space bar. Then, in a voice lower than I'd ever heard it, he said, I used to think he was choosing it. The sadness. The quiet. I thought he was being lazy. Weak. I said nothing. Let the silence give him room. He exhaled. I was wrong. He was fighting. Every damn day. I nodded slowly. He was. And he wrote about you too. Even when you stopped talking to him, he never stopped loving you. Dad's hand trembled slightly. After a pause, he asked, would you read me something? One of the pages. I blinked, stunned. Then I walked to the house, grabbed one of Daniel's notebooks, the gray one, mid-year 2020, and sat beside my father as the scent of machine oil and old paper filled the air. I read aloud. June 29th, 2020. Dad's been quiet lately. I don't blame him. I probably make it harder. I want to tell him I'm trying. I want to tell him I remember when he taught me to fix a bike chain when I was 9. He called me Mechanic Junior. I still remember the grease under my fingernails and how proud he looked. I hope he remembers it too. I hope he still sees that version of me. When I finished, Dad cleared his throat. Then he reached for a rag and began cleaning the typewriter keys. I remember, he said softly. In the weeks that followed, our family grew more fluent in silence, not as avoidance, but as understanding. We started using fewer words, but better ones. One night, while sorting more letters for Daniel Binder, Mom said, you know, I used to dread coming home. I looked up. She smiled. But now I look forward to the quiet. Because now it's not the sound of someone missing. It's the sound of someone remembered. People online began asking for advice. How do I talk to someone who's depressed? What if they won't let me in? What if I'm the one who feels invisible? I didn't have perfect answers, but I told them what I had learned. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Just show up. Stay near. Let your presence be the message. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. Silence doesn't mean you don't care, it means you're listening. One person replied, thank you. I sat next to my brother today. We didn't talk. We just played cards. It was the best conversation we've had in years. Daniel would have loved that. That Sunday, I added something new to the Museum of Small Things. It was a sticky note, pale yellow, folded in half, edges curled. On it, written in blue ink, were 6 words. You looked at me. Thank you. I had found it wedged in the back of Daniel's notebook. With no date, no context. Just that sentence. I placed it on the shelf and wrote the card myself. For the day I finally saw him. That evening, we didn't light the candle. Instead, we let the darkness settle around us gently. We sat together, Mom, Dad, me, drinking tea in a room quiet enough to hear every breath. No one spoke. And for the first time, the silence didn't ache. It healed. Chapter 14, The Apology Tour. It started as a joke. Rachel called it the Apology Tour the first time I mentioned it, with a smirk in her voice and a kindness in her tone that made it sting less. I don't think you owe the world apologies, she said. But I get it. Sometimes, saying sorry isn't about guilt. It's about reconnecting. She was right. After the book came out, I began to realize how many people I had quietly abandoned during the years I spent avoiding Daniel. Friends I ghosted. Classmates I resented. Teachers I ignored. I used to think I was grieving him in real time, but truthfully, I was protecting myself from reflection. And now that the reflection had arrived, clear and sharp, I knew I had things to say. So I made a list. And I started reaching out. The first person I called was Mr. Hayward, my 12th grade English teacher. He had once pulled me aside after class, concerned about a piece I'd written for a reflective essay. It was about a boy watching his older brother disappear into a locked room every night. "It feels real," he'd said. "But there's a wall in it. You write like you want to scream, but you whisper instead." I had shrugged and said it was just fiction. Then I never looked him in the eye again. When I called him, his voice cracked slightly after I introduced myself. "You wrote that book," he said. "I read it last week." I cried. "I wanted to thank you," I told him, "for seeing me, even when I didn't want to be seen." There was a long pause. Then, that essay. I saved it. I always wondered how it would end. Now he knew. Next, I reached out to Lisa Morales, a childhood friend who lived across the street growing up. We hadn't spoken since Daniel's funeral. She had tried to hug me that day, and I'd pulled away, hollow and unresponsive. I barely remembered it, but she did. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe on 3rd and Pike. She wore the same lavender scarf I remembered from summers past. "You don't have to explain," she said before I could even begin. "You were grieving." We all were. "I was hiding," I corrected. "You came to the house. You brought food. You sat with my mom. You asked about Daniel." And I shut down. She nodded, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're here now. That's what counts." The hardest visit was to Dr. Lee, Daniel's old therapist. We had found her contact in Daniel's notebook, an entry where he wrote, "Dr. Lee asked me today who I'm living for." I didn't want to say Ethan. Felt too raw. But it's always been Ethan. I showed up at her office with a copy of the book, trembling. "I don't know if this is inappropriate," I told her, "but I needed you to know what he meant to us. What he meant to me." She flipped through the first few pages. Then she looked at me and said, "He used to write your name on the corner of every drawing he made, even when you weren't in it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I didn't deserve that." "No," she said gently. "But he didn't write it because you were perfect. He wrote it because you were home." That night, I sat by Daniel's shelf and added something new, a small hand-drawn comic of 2 stick figures on a porch, one handing the other a slice of pizza. It was a doodle he'd made at age 10, taped to my bedroom door after I got grounded. He'd written in bubble letters, "Sorry you're stuck inside. I brought food and feelings." Underneath it, I placed a card. "For the boy who apologized in drawings. I'm finally catching up." I didn't think healing would look like driving across the city with a notebook full of names and a heart full of things I didn't say in time. But that's what the apology tour became. A way to scatter Daniel's voice like seeds, not just in the pages of a book, but in the pauses between conversations, in the way we show up when it's uncomfortable, in the way we choose people even when we don't know how to fix anything. It wasn't about being forgiven. It was about remembering what love looks like when you try again. One day, I got a letter from a stranger, a high school senior from Colorado. She wrote, "My brother tried to take his life last year. We didn't understand him. I didn't understand him. But your book helped me say the one thing that mattered. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." He cried. "He's in therapy now. We're healing. So thank you for your apology." It gave me permission to say mine. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I opened Daniel's final journal. And on a blank page, I wrote, "I'm sorry. I love you. I'm still learning how to be your brother even now. But I'm not going anywhere." Chapter 15, Public Grief, Private Truths. There's a strange dissonance in grieving someone publicly. One moment, you're crying in your kitchen over a half-folded hoodie that still smells like them. The next, you're sitting under bright stage lights with a microphone clipped to your collar, answering questions from strangers who start their sentences with, "I know this is personal, but it's not wrong. Not even unkind." In fact, most of it comes from love, from people who truly care, who see Daniel in their sons, their brothers, their friends. And I owe it to them to keep showing up. But some days, it feels like everyone in the world has a piece of Daniel now except me. The first time it really hit was at a college event in Portland. I had been invited to speak at a mental health awareness panel. Students packed into the auditorium, some holding dog-eared copies of the book. I could see the bookmarks, the sticky notes, the underlined passages, all the places where Daniel had reached them. And I was grateful. But when the Q&A began, a girl in the second row stood up. She had short pink hair, nervous hands, and eyes that didn't blink. She asked if you could say one thing to Daniel now. Knowing the whole world is listening, what would it be? It was a kind question. But I froze. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't want the answer to belong to the room. I wanted it to belong to him. I cleared my throat. I'd say. Then I paused. I'd say, I hope I'm making you proud. And I hope you forgive me for taking this long to learn how to love you out loud. Applause came, soft and steady. But in my heart, I didn't hear it. I heard Daniel's voice, faint but teasing, little man's getting poetic now. That was enough to make me smile. After the event, a woman waited quietly by the side door. She looked older, maybe in her 60s, and held a copy of the book close to her chest like it might slip away if she loosened her grip. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photo, a boy, maybe 17, playing piano in a dimly lit room. "This is my grandson," she said. "He died last year. We didn't understand him. Not until we read your book. Now we talk about him differently. We remember him kindly, not just sadly." I swallowed hard. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded. Then she touched the corner of the book and whispered, "Tell Daniel thank you too." That night in my hotel room, I pulled out my journal, one I'd started after finishing Daniel's last entry, and I wrote, "People keep thanking me for Daniel, as if he was a gift I gave them. But the truth is, they're giving him back to me in stories, in reflections, in grief that knows his name. And somehow, I feel closer to him now than I ever did when he was alive." I paused, then added, "Maybe love is what survives us. Not the polished version, but the kind that breaks open and invites the world inside." Being in the public eye while grieving feels like walking barefoot across glass. There's beauty in the light that filters through, but it cuts. You learn quickly what to say, what to leave out, which memories are for the world and which are only yours. There are things I've never shared, like the way Daniel hummed when he was nervous, or how he tapped his pencil 3 times before starting a journal entry, or how he once told me that if he could be any object, he'd be a window, so people could look through me and still see something beautiful. Those things I keep, not because I'm hoarding them, but because they are mine, and his. Private truths. Quiet love. Still breathing beneath the public story. The hardest moments come when I least expect them. Like when I'm at a grocery store and hear someone say, "Excuse me, Ethan?" with awe in their voice. Or when someone introduces me at a dinner party as the guy who wrote the book about his brother. I always smile. Always nod. Always say, "Yes, that's me." But deep down, I want to say, I'm still the guy who flinches at his name in the dark. I'm still the guy who misses his voice at 2 a.m. I'm still the guy who wasn't ready. And maybe never will be. And yet, the grief is softer now. Less like a storm. More like a tide. It rises. It falls. Some days, it surprises me, like catching my reflection and realizing I've aged 5 years since I last heard him laugh. Other days, it feels like warmth, like a secret I get to keep carrying. One evening, I returned home to find Mom sitting on the floor in front of Daniel's shelf. She was humming. Not a song I recognized, just a melody. Soft and slow. She looked up at me and smiled. He used to hum this when he thought no one was listening. I sat beside her, and for a while, we didn't speak. We just listened to the silence. Chapter 16. The Letters I Never Sent. In the final notebook Daniel left behind, there were 4 pages left blank. I used to wonder why. He filled every other journal to the edge. His thoughts packed in like confessions needing space to breathe. But these, untouched on purpose, felt like a message in reverse. Space for something unfinished. Space for someone else to speak. One night, Long after the house had gone quiet and the candle at Daniel's shelf had burned low, I sat at my desk with one of those blank pages in front of me. And I started to write. Not a book. Not a post. Just a letter. To him. Dear Daniel, it's been a year. A year since the doc. A year since the notebooks. A year since I realized that loving someone doesn't always mean you know how to hold them through their pain, but it does mean you try again, even after you failed. I've been writing about you almost every day since. But this is the letter I never sent. Because part of me still doesn't believe you're gone. And the other part? It believes you never really left. You are in every hallway of this house now. Every long pause in Dad's voice. Every careful smile Mom makes when she holds your picture. Every sentence I write. Hoping it might help someone else stay just a little longer. You should know, you've helped more people than you ever imagined. Not because you were perfect, but because you were true. You showed us how to hurt honestly. How to love quietly. How to leave behind a map, even as you were getting lost. I'm sorry I didn't follow it sooner. But I'm here now. Not just for you. For others like you. For those still writing letters in the dark. Still waiting to be read. And Daniel? I see you now. Fully. Finally. Thank you for waiting. Love. Ethan. I folded the letter and slid it into the final journal. Not to bury it, but to give it a home. In the weeks that followed, I started a project. Not another book. Something quieter. More personal. I built a website with Rachel's help. Letters I never sent. A place where people could write their own unsent letters to loved ones, to lost friends, to the versions of themselves they didn't get to say goodbye to. There were no likes. No shares. Just words. Posted anonymously or with names if they wished. A museum of grief in motion. Within days, the letters poured in. Dear Mom, I'm sorry I didn't come home that night. Dear Jake, I forgive you now. Dear me, you're still here. That's enough. Each one, a tiny act of healing. Each one. A light left on in a dark room. I added one more page to Daniel's shelf. A plain white card, no object beside it. Just this. For the words we never said. And the ones we're still learning how to. Some nights, I still dream about him. But the dreams are different now. He's not locked in his room. He's not silent on the dock. He's standing beside me, arms crossed. Smiling like he's waiting for me to catch up. And sometimes he says, "You took your time, little man." And I answer, "I know. But I'm here now." Chapter 17, The Last Birthday. Daniel's birthday was always quiet in our family, even before everything changed. He never liked the fuss, the cake, the songs that felt too loud or too forced. When we were kids, he'd smile politely but always seemed relieved when the day was over. That year, the first since he died, Mom suggested we do something different. Something small, but meaningful. I thought maybe we could light a candle for him, she said softly. Say a few words. Just the three of us. Dad nodded in agreement. It's time we remember him the way he wanted. Not as the shadow he left behind, but as the light he carried. So we gathered in the living room, the museum of small things glowing gently in the corner. Mom brought out the candle. And I held the framed photo of Daniel from his senior year. Dad placed a fresh marigold on the shelf, the flower he'd always loved. We lit the candle together, the flame flickering like a heartbeat. Mom spoke first, voice trembling but steady. Daniel was our son. Our brother. Our light in the dark. He struggled, yes, but he loved fiercely in ways we're still learning to understand. I added. He taught me that silence isn't emptiness. That love can live quietly, even when it's loud inside. Dad, who rarely spoke in moments like this, cleared his throat. I'm sorry I didn't see him. Not fully. But I'm proud of the man he was and the man you're becoming. We held hands. The room was filled with a warmth that no words could capture. Later that night, I sat alone with Daniel's last journal, reading his final entries by candlelight. December 25th, 2023. It's my birthday. I'm alone, but I'm okay. I think the light I left behind is starting to grow. Maybe one day it'll guide Ethan home. I closed the notebook, tears blurring the edges of the page. He had known, all along, that his story wasn't just about ending. It was about beginning again. The next morning, I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter. Not to Daniel this time. To the world. To everyone who had walked through their own darkness and found a sliver of light. Because the journey isn't over. It never really ends. But sometimes, the way forward is found by following a flame, fragile, flickering, but steadfast. That flame was Daniel. And it was ours to carry. Chapter 18. The Flame We Carry. The flame Daniel left behind isn't something you see with your eyes. It's a feeling, a warmth that glows in the cold moments. A quiet light in the long nights when hope seems far away. It's the courage to keep moving, to keep loving, even when the past aches and the future feels uncertain. After his birthday, I started volunteering with a local mental health nonprofit. I spoke at schools and community centers, sharing Daniel's story, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the power of compassion and connection. I met people like Maya, a teenager struggling in silence, whose eyes lit up the first time someone simply listened. Like Marcus, a father who finally hugged his son after years of distance. Like so many others who carried their own shadows, but were learning to walk toward the light. One afternoon, I received a message from a stranger. "Your book saved my brother's life. I just wanted to say thank you." I replied, "Thank you for sharing. That means everything." It reminded me that Daniel's story wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed to hear that they were not alone. At home, the shelf remains, filled with small things and big memories, with letters, laughter, and love. And every Sunday night, we light the candle, not to mourn, but to remember, to celebrate, to carry the flame forward. I often think about what Daniel would say if he could see how far we've come. Maybe he'd roll his eyes, like he always did when I got too sentimental. Or maybe he'd smile, that small, knowing smile that meant everything. And I'd tell him, "We're still here, little man. We're still carrying your light." Chapter 19. A Legacy of Light. Months had passed since the book's release, and the candle on Daniel's shelf had been lit countless times. The flame wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was a movement. I received letters from teachers who used the book in classrooms. From families who started their own museums of small things. From young adults who found courage to speak, to live, to hope again. One afternoon, Rachel and I attended a community event in Seattle where the city unveiled a mural dedicated to Daniel's story, a vibrant tapestry of colors and images, a boy with a notebook, a small marigold, a glowing candle. As we stood before it, I felt the weight of everything, the pain, the silence, the love, and the light. Daniel's story was no longer just ours. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt unseen and unheard. Rachel nudged me gently. "Look at that." Children were gathering nearby, pointing at the mural, reading the inscriptions. One little girl held a folded piece of paper, her own letter never sent. I smiled. Daniel had become more than a memory. He had become a beacon. A legacy of light. That night at home, I placed a new object on the shelf, a small lantern, old and weathered, but still shining bright. I wrote a new card, "Lantern for the light that guides us, even through the darkest nights." And as I blew out the candle, I whispered softly, "We carry you forward, Daniel. Always." Chapter 20. Passing the Torch. Years later, I found myself sitting at a small community center, surrounded by a circle of young faces. Teenagers, parents, teachers, all gathered to talk openly about mental health, grief, and the power of sharing our stories. I held Daniel's old journal in my hands, the very first one he wrote in, fragile now but still alive with his words. I looked around the room and began. "This is more than a book," I said softly. "It's a reminder that every voice matters, even the quietest ones. That sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is say, 'I'm still here.'" One girl raised her hand. "How do you keep going when it feels like no one sees you?" I smiled gently. "You keep going because sometimes, you do see someone else. And that connection, even the smallest one, can light the way." Afterwards, a boy approached me, clutching a worn notebook. My brother wrote journals too, he said shyly. I want to share them someday. I nodded. That's how we pass the torch. One story at a time. Back home, the shelf was fuller than ever. Small mementos from friends, letters from readers, and tokens of healing, each telling a piece of Daniel's legacy. The flame still burned. And now it wasn't just ours. It belonged to everyone who had ever needed light in the dark. As I closed Daniel's journal that night, I whispered a promise into the quiet room. Your story will keep shining, little man. Because love never fades, it only passes on.